It was a calm afternoon when Sarah received the unexpected text message. She had been spending the day tidying up her apartment, preparing for the evening ahead, when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. At first, she thought it might be a work-related message or a reminder about a meeting, but when she saw the name on the screen, her heart skipped a beat. The message was from her ex-husband, Mark. They hadn't spoken in years, not since their bitter divorce, which had ended with both of them wounded and emotionally drained. Sarah had tried to move on from the pain, rebuild her life, and start over, but seeing Mark's name on her phone brought all the old feelings rushing back. She hadn't expected to hear from him ever again, and yet there he was. She took a deep breath and clicked on the message. The text read, "I made a mistake. Can we meet?" Sarah stared at the screen, her mind racing. What could he possibly want now? Why, after all these years? Was he reaching out to her? The last time they had talked was when the divorce papers were signed, and neither of them had looked back. It had been a long and painful process, full of accusations, tears, and endless arguments. So why now? Curiosity and confusion gnawed at her, but a part of her was also afraid. There was a part of her that still remembered the man she had married, the person she had once loved with all her heart. But there was also the version of him she had learned to hate, the man who had betrayed her, who had made her feel worthless in the end. Despite everything, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what he meant by, "I made a mistake." Could he possibly be apologizing for everything that had gone wrong? Could he be trying to repair what they had lost? Or was this some ploy to get back into her life and cause more heartache? She decided to respond, her fingers hovering over the screen. "What do you want, Mark?" She typed. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pressed send. The minutes that followed felt like hours. She anxiously watched her phone, waiting for his reply. She was about to give up and put the phone down when it buzzed again. "Can we meet in person? I'll explain everything. It's important." Her first instinct was to say no, to shut the door on this chapter of her life once and for all. But something in his message felt different. Like there was a sincerity in his words she hadn't expected. After all these years, maybe he was genuinely sorry. Maybe he wanted closure, just like her. Where and when? She replied, her fingers trembling as she hit send. They agreed to meet at a coffee shop in the middle of the city, a place they had visited often during their marriage. Sarah wasn't sure what to expect, but the anticipation made her feel uneasy. She hadn't seen Mark in so long, and she wasn't sure how she would react when she finally laid eyes on him again. The day of their meeting arrived, and Sarah dressed carefully. She chose something simple but flattering, something that would make her feel confident. She arrived at the coffee shop early, hoping to calm her nerves before Mark showed up. She sat at a table by the window, watching the street outside as she waited. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah's mind raced with questions. What could he possibly want? What would he say? Would she be able to control her emotions? Or would she break down in front of him? She tried to shake off the anxiety, telling herself that whatever happened, she would be strong. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door opened and Mark walked in. He was older, his hair graying at the temples, but there was something about him that hadn't changed. He still had that same familiar look in his eyes, the same expression that used to make her feel safe and loved. But now, all Sarah felt was a flood of conflicting emotions, anger, hurt, and a sense of betrayal. He looked around the coffee shop, spotted her, and made his way toward the table. As he approached, Sarah stood up to greet him, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't seen him in years, but it felt like no time had passed at all. The air between them was thick with unspoken words and unresolved pain. "Hi," Mark said softly, his voice uncertain. "Hi," Sarah replied, her tone cool but not unkind. They sat down across from each other, the silence stretching between them. Neither of them knew where to start. After a few moments, Mark spoke again, his voice hesitant. "I'm sorry," he said, looking down at his hands. "I know I've hurt you, and I've spent so many years regretting what happened." Sarah felt a surge of emotions, but she forced herself to stay composed. She had spent so long burying her pain, trying to move on, and now it all threatened to surface again. "I don't know what you want from me, Mark," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "After everything that happened, why now? Why reach out to me after all these years? Mark looked up at her, his eyes filled with regret. I've had a lot of time to think, and I've realized that I made a huge mistake. I should have never let you go. You were always the one who was there for me, and I took you for granted. I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. Processing his words, it was hard to believe, hard to accept that the man who had torn her apart was now sitting across from her, apologizing. She had dreamed of hearing those words for years, but now that they were spoken, they didn't bring her the relief she had imagined. Instead, they just felt like a reminder of everything she had lost. What you did to me, it changed everything. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget. Mark nodded, his face etched with sadness. I don't expect you to forgive me, Sarah. I don't even deserve it. But I needed to tell you how sorry I am, and that I regret everything. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Sarah didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much he had hurt her, how much he had destroyed her, but the other part of her just felt empty. The man she had once loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who seemed to think that an apology could erase the years of pain. They sat in silence for a while, neither knowing what to say next. Finally, Sarah broke the quiet. I can't do this anymore. Mark stood up with her, looking as if he wanted to say something else, but no words came. He simply nodded. Take care of yourself, Sarah, he said quietly. As Sarah walked out of the coffee shop, she felt a strange sense of peace. She had gotten the apology she had always wanted, but it hadn't changed anything. She had spent so many years trying to move on from him, and now she was finally free. Free from the past, free from the pain, and free to live her life without the weight of old wounds holding her back. As she stepped into the sunlight, she knew that her journey was far from over, but she was no longer defined by her past. She had the power to choose her own future, and that was all that mattered now. I've taken on all the responsibilities in our home, cleaning, cooking, and every single chore without ever receiving help from him, simply to please him and keep the peace. I've done everything he's asked of me without complaining. Yet, despite all of my efforts, his outbursts are frequent and increasingly hurtful. During these moments, he hurls insults at me so loud that our children can hear it from their bedrooms. It's as though his anger knows no boundaries, and it spills over to affect everyone around him, especially me. There are also times when he completely ignores me, moving around the house as though I don't even exist. It's a coldness I cannot understand. For someone who once told me that I was his whole world, it's incredibly painful to be treated as if I'm invisible. He acts like I'm nothing, and I don't know how to process that. Yet in all of this, there's a paradox. Despite everything, he still treats our children with love. He's careful to shield them from our arguments, always making sure they don't see how much we're struggling. He avoids speaking negatively about me to them, trying his best to keep the facade of a happy family in front of their innocent eyes. It's almost like he doesn't want them to know how much of a mess our relationship has become. It hasn't been easy for me. There are times when I struggle to do things for him, things that should come naturally in a partnership. And when I fail, he threatens divorce, constantly reminding me of my past mistakes. He points to my infidelity as the root of our problems, telling me marrying me was a mistake, calling me cruel names. It's like my past, the thing I regret most, is all he sees anymore, and nothing I do in the present seems to matter. I also know about his communication with other women. Each time I confront him, he deflects, throwing my past mistakes back at me. It feels like I'm trapped in a cycle of guilt and regret that he refuses to let me escape. I don't have proof of physical cheating, but I can feel it. There's a disconnect between us now, and the man I married seems so distant, so different. What I long for more than anything is for things to go back to how they were. I want to feel loved again, to heal our family, and for him to see beyond my past mistakes. But it feels impossible, and I fear I'm losing him. One day, after confronting him about a message from another woman, something in him snapped. He grabbed my hand, dragged me into the hallway, and pointed to the door, telling me to leave if I wanted. It was as if I were a stranger to him. His coldness, the complete lack of care for my feelings, stung deeply. In that moment, I felt invisible to him. I feel like I've lost the man I once loved, the one who used to be kind and gentle. Now he's bitter, angry, distant. I don't recognize him anymore, and I don't know how to find the man I married. Despite everything, I still love him deeply. I can't imagine being with anyone else. I regret my mistakes every day, but I've tried to make amends. I've worked on myself, trying to rebuild what we had, but it feels like I'm fighting a battle I can't win. I just want my family back, but I'm not sure that's even possible. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Maybe what I need right now is just to vent, to have someone listen. I wish I could undo the past and fix everything between us. I've been careful to take full responsibility for my actions in therapy. I never blamed him for what happened. But then, our therapist suggested my husband's behavior might have contributed to pushing me away. And I didn't know how to process that. It shifted everything, and I began to wonder if I had been wrong about everything. Therapy has brought up some painful truths, but it's only made things more complicated. I've considered switching therapists, hoping a new perspective might help us. I want to fight for this marriage, but lately, it feels like I'm the only one putting in the effort, and that's exhausting. Today, I decided it was time for an honest conversation. I'd been hearing from others that he was done, that he didn't want to try anymore. So I went to him, hoping to show him I understood his pain. I told him that if he didn't want to work on our marriage, if he wanted to move on, I would respect that. But I wanted him to know that I still loved him, deeply and truly. At first, he was silent. His silence was deafening, and I wasn't sure what to expect. But then he hugged me. For the first time in so long, it felt real. I could feel the emotion in his embrace, and for a moment I felt like I mattered again. After a few minutes of silence, he spoke. He said he still loved me, that he cared about our children, but he couldn't forgive me for what I'd done. The betrayal still haunted him, playing over and over in his mind. He wasn't just angry about the infidelity. He was hurt by the pain I caused him. Then he told me something that shattered me even more. Over the years, he had been tempted by other women, but never acted on it. He said his love for me and our family was too strong to hurt me like I had hurt him. He couldn't understand how I could do this to him after everything he had given me. He admitted to talking to other women over the past few months, but assured me he hadn't crossed any physical boundaries. Emotionally, though, he was already checked out. When I suggested he might want to move on for the first time, I felt like he understood the depth of my pain. He told me he wasn't sure about our future, but for now he needed space to heal. He needed to focus on himself, to be single. Maybe in the future we could reconcile, but right now he needed time. I told him I would sign the divorce papers if that's what he wanted. I didn't want to take anything from him, no money, no property. He had worked hard for it all, and I didn't want to burden him. Hearing that brought him to tears. He told me he hoped someday he could find it in himself to forgive me. He thought some time apart could be good for both of us, to give us space to reflect. He mentioned speaking with a lawyer and expected the divorce papers to be ready in about a week. I don't want anyone else after this. I don't want a new life, just for him to come back, for us to heal, and for our family to be whole again. I love him like I've never loved anyone, but the weight of my mistakes is suffocating, and I fear I've lost the one person who truly mattered. Fast forward 8 months, and our divorce was finalized, but excluded alimony due to Amber's infidelity and the affair child. Child support was only sought for my 3 biological children, though it was expected that the judge would require support for Seth since I was his legal father. Ultimately, the judge ruled I must pay child support for Seth as well. Alimony was removed from the settlement, and I was allowed to keep the house. Primary custody. After the verdict, the judge asked if Amber or I had any questions. Amber took the opportunity to express her remorse once again, hoping we might reunite one day. I thanked the judge for a fair verdict and for allowing me to speak. I then raised a concern about the state's family court laws, highlighting the apparent bias against men. I questioned the fairness of a situation where a woman cheats, has a child with another man, deceives her husband, yet she's awarded primary custody, and the husband is financially responsible for a child who isn't even his. The judge acknowledged my perspective, but explained that she follows the law and prioritizes the best interest of children. She clarified that it was in the child's best interest for me to continue being Seth's legal father. She commended me for being a good man and a great father, which influenced her decision to grant me percent custody and allow me to keep the family home. The judge also pointed out that the only way I could be relieved of my parental responsibilities was if the biological father stepped forward. Even then, a thorough assessment of his fitness would be conducted. I informed the judge that I had already provided the biological father's name and address, asking if that was enough to initiate a DNA test. The judge explained that this was a civil matter, and either my ex-wife or I would have to persuade the biological father to come forward voluntarily, or Amber could file a paternity lawsuit. Amber's attorney then intervened, saying Amber didn't want to involve another man in Seth's life, claiming that Seth already had a wonderful father in me. I concluded by feeling as if everyone in the courtroom was telling me to just deal with it. I shared this experience to warn any man considering marriage to fully understand the family laws in their state. The hearing ended, and I was officially divorced. I continued to meet my child support obligations and did my best to be a good father to all of my children, including Seth. I treated Seth like my own son because in my heart he was. A few years later, I met Jill, married her, and we had 2 boys together. Now I have 6 children and couldn't be happier. I thank the Lord every day for my children and for bringing Jill into my life at the right time. As for Amber, I forgave her long ago. These days, she focuses on being a mother and taking care of her elderly parents. Since our divorce, she's gained weight and was recently diagnosed with type diabetes, requiring daily medication. Before Jill and I became serious, Amber tried numerous times to win me back, even attempting to manipulate the kids into convincing me. I quickly put a stop to that. Over the years, she has apologized repeatedly, acknowledging that the affair was the worst mistake of her life. We're on good terms now, co-parenting smoothly. Amber is planning to go back to school to become an LPN, as she will need a stable income once child support expires in a few years. She's still driving the year-old van from the divorce, though it will soon need replacing. Over the years, Amber has dated a few older men, but none of these relationships have turned serious. I imagine it's tough to date when you're a mother of 4. That's everything I wanted to share. If you're a man considering marriage, take the time to think things through, make sure you have the right partner, and understand the laws in your state. You won't regret it. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Your support helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more incredible stories just like this one. Thanks for being part of the journey.